Capitol Report is a production of Senate Media Services.
On this week's program, we're talking politics with the minority leaders of both the Senate and the House about their efforts to take control of their chambers. We'll also take a look at a new memorial on the Capitol grounds. Stay tuned for this and more on this week's Capitol Report. Welcome to this week's program. I'm Shannon Loehrke. With just over a month until the election and all 201 state legislative seats up for grabs, it's time for voters to decide which direction the state of Minnesota will head next. Joining me in the studio to talk about his caucus's efforts to take back the Senate majority is the current Senate Republican leader, David Hann. Thanks for being here.
Good to be with you.
Your caucus would like to take control of the Senate, and you need 6 seats to do so. What is your message to voters?
Well, I think, first of all, the Democrats have really been the majority party in the Senate for most of the last 45 years. So we think we need a change in direction. What we've seen in the last several years with Democrat control is we've seen higher taxes. We've certainly seen a greater accelerated pace of state spending, but we haven't seen results. I think the biggest issue that we see and what we hear about is about health care. That this was an idea that the Democrats in this state and nationally pushed to try to improve our health care system, and it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked at all. It's made it worse. And we think that is a top priority. We need to make sure that we do things to restore a strong insurance market and see those health care insurance premiums go down, and that people have more access to providers, which has been diminished with this so-called reform. So that is a top concern that we have. We also are very concerned about the economy. With the high taxes and the regulations and these policies actually chasing people out of our state. We need to attract people to Minnesota. We want them to come, invest, build businesses, stay here, and we're chasing people away instead of attracting them to Minnesota. So those are 2 of the top concerns that we have. We want patient-centered health care, and we also want, by the way, student-centered education. And this is another one of the things that we think that the Democrats have failed in their leadership. They've spent a lot of money, but we have not seen any improvement in the achievement gap. We still have the worst record of all the states in the country on how well we educate kids that arguably are most in need of an education. We think we've got ideas on both those things to make it better.
Very little was accomplished in the last legislative session. There was no bonding bill, no tax bill, no transportation funding. What do you say to voters that are getting fed up with the partisan gridlock?
Well, I think in this case, this most recent year, the difficulty was a governor who vetoed a tax bill that he promised he wouldn't veto, and a Senate Democrat majority that torpedoed a bonding transportation package that passed by a very wide bipartisan margin in the House. And I think for political purposes, they decided to add an amendment that, in effect, ruined that opportunity for that bill to pass. So I think to the extent that people are frustrated with the results this year, I think you have to look at the Senate Democrat majority as a big part of why we had that problem. So I think most things that we deal with in the legislature, you probably know this, I hope the listeners or viewers know it as well, most of the things that we do are done in a very bipartisan way. There's no question. There are a few things that are kind of flashpoints, if you will, that really highlight the differences. Things like gas taxes, for example. Democrats think that we need to spend more money on transportation. Republicans believe we need to do the same thing, but the approach to doing it is very different. We think we have sufficient funds if we prioritize our spending. Democrats are saying, no, let's raise let's make our gas tax one of the highest in the country. We don't think we need to do that. So there are differences that are hard to find compromises on. Something like a gas tax, it's either on or off. You're either for it or against it. But those are things that do get a lot of attention. And frankly, we need to ask the public, what is your preference? Do you need more taxes on the economy, or can we take the money that we have and prioritize it more effectively?
Now, you mentioned it a little bit earlier about health care, and the GOP has been really critical of MNsure. Rates are coming out tomorrow, but what are some key points of your plan, and what would your party do differently?
Well, there's a couple of things. One thing, for example, when this was all happening, Republicans offered suggestions. They were all turned away. This was a completely partisan effort on the part of Democrats to say, we know how to do this. We are going to do it. We don't need your help, Republicans. And they did what they did. And it has turned out to be a disaster. We've had hundreds of thousands of people lose their insurance. We've had insurers decide they can't survive in the marketplace. They have left the marketplace. People have lost their providers. And insurance premiums, instead of the promised reduction, which is what Democrats Democrats said they'd see, they've gone up at an alarming pace and are scheduled to go up again, I think even more. So what we think we can do is we can do some things to restore the marketplace. One thing, for example, is to bring back the high-risk pool. Minnesota was a leader in this and had been for decades. We had a high-risk pool that guaranteed insurance for anybody, regardless of what condition they may have had. And that worked very well. And one thing it did do is it kept the non-high risk, if you will, customers in a pool that was affordable. We think we can restore that, and that is one of the things that we will do.
Okay. There was an article in the Pioneer Press. There have also been other articles about the sheer amount of money, outside money, coming into these Minnesota legislative races. Some races could exceed $1 million. Is control of the legislature warranting this much money being spent? Are the stakes this high?
Well, you know, I think there's always going to be money spent in political races. There is a lot of money more spent now than there was maybe a decade or two ago, but everything has gotten more expensive. So I don't think it's a bad thing to recognize that you need to spend money to win elections, but it's not the only thing that makes the decision in people's minds. A lot of it is candidates, and a lot of it is sort of intangible things, but money is a part of it. But I think that what it signals is that there is great frustration at the national level what the federal government is doing, and I think there's a recognition that the state governments are really where there needs to be some reform. I think there needs to be a recognition that states have the ability and should have the ability to manage their affairs. That's been our message as Republicans, that we want to stop turning over all the decision makings on things like education or healthcare or even transportation to a federal government. That's not their role. We should do that here in Minnesota. So I think the recognition of the role that states play is getting maybe a little more heightened, and that may be part of the interest.
Thank you so much for coming by today.
Thanks for having me.
Republicans currently hold the majority in the House of Representatives, and joining me in the studio to talk about how the DFL hopes to pick up the 7 seats necessary to regain control is House Minority Leader Paul Teason. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks.
I've heard the governor say on more than one occasion that the problems that the legislature has experienced getting its work done is due to divided government. In addition, the Harvard Business School recently released a report saying that government gridlock is the single most important challenge to U.S. economic progress. So what is the DFL message to voters to vote for you this election?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, I think it's undeniable that over the last 2 years, we have seen kind of our ability to function as a state government largely grind to a halt. There were some good things done, and some nursing home funding as an example. But generally speaking, the big things that we were supposed to get done, and pretty basic things like a bonding bill, a comprehensive transportation bill, even a tax bill, it didn't happen. And I think that is clearly problematic. It's certainly frustrating voters, as I've been out talking to them all over the state. So I do think that the choice that is before the voters, or one of the fundamental choices, is do we want to continue gridlock, not getting things done? I mean, I think the Republicans would argue yes, because they want to stop the excesses of the DFL, in their words. My sense is that it's actually better for us to try to make some progress for Minnesotans and make our economy work for everyone, and there's certainly steps that we can take to make that happen. So I think, generally speaking, that I think the governor's right, and that if we could get to a place where people are actually willing to work together and make progress, we'd be better off. The other thing that we can do, and that we're talking about in this regard, is actually making our legislative process better. More transparency, more public input, earlier deadlines, making sure we get done during the regular session instead of talking about all these special sessions. And so there are things we can do as a legislature to improve our game. And as Democrats, we're very committed. We tried to do stuff in the last session to make that happen. It was blocked. But if we do come back in the majority, that's going to be one of our top priorities.
Well, and you actually already said this, but Republicans will say that we need divided government to put a check on the out-of-control spending of the DFL. Republicans also have concerns about high taxes and MNsure and the DFL policies and regulations that they say are bad for business. So how do you counter those assertions?
Well, I mean, first of all, what I would say is the Republicans like that talking point about excessive spending, and then they love to go and vote for that spending and go back to their constituents and say, look, I spent this money on nursing homes, I invested all this money in our schools, I invested all this money in making sure our environment is clean and making sure that our roads and bridges are being built. So in some sense, I feel like the Republicans like the talking point, but they also like to spend the money. And I think that's because most Minnesotans understand that we need to actually make these investments. So they don't talk about the specific money that's being spent. They just like to use this big word, excessive spending, kind of generically. And when I talk to voters, I always talk about the things that we're actually spending money on. Does that mean that we don't need to be vigilant about making sure we're spending our money more smartly? And we absolutely need to do that. And I think that that's something that Democrats are absolutely interested in. I would also say that if you look at the budgets that have been passed, the responsible budgets, the budgets that actually balance, that don't use accounting gimmicks, are budgets that Democrats have passed. You know, we repaid the school shift when the Republicans borrowed all that money from our schools to continue to spend money. And so I think we actually have a good argument to make on that. And the other thing we are hearing, are going to hear a lot about, I think, is health insurance premiums. That certainly is a very serious issue for a lot of Minnesotans. I mean, it's right now limited to the 5% of Minnesotans that buy their insurance in the individual market. Well, and on the individual market, not just on MNsure. And in fact, this isn't really a MNsure issue. This part of it is just that there's too many sick people in the individual market. And so we need to take steps to do that. And I would, I'm glad this is part of the debate, because I would put our plans for trying to deal with these rising healthcare costs, cracking down on insurance companies, cracking down on prescription drug manufacturers and pharmaceutical companies, making sure that we're actually lowering the cost of healthcare, because that's what this is all about. The Republican plan was to give tax breaks to insurance companies, and it was to throw 100,000 Minnesotans off of health care. So, I mean, if we're going to have a legitimate discussion about how actually to deal with our health care crisis, I think Democrats actually have a much stronger argument that's going to fix the problem and acknowledge that we need to make sure that health care is accessible to people.
Let's move a slightly different direction. Multiple media outlets are reporting the millions of dollars that are coming from outside interest groups into our local statewide races. Millions of dollars. Is this too much money? Are the stakes this high? Should we be spending this much money on elections?
Well, I mean, I would say that the stakes are high because we really are making a decision about the future of the state of Minnesota. That said, spending $1 million on a district where the person represents 40,000 people does seem excessive to me for a number of reasons. One, it is so much spending and so much communication that it kind of drowns everybody out. The second thing is it really takes away the voice of the individual candidate, the individual representative. You know, they're spending $40,000 or $50,000 compared to hundreds of thousands of dollars by these outside interest groups. So I do think that there is an issue that we need to address there, kind of on a bipartisan basis. And the other thing that's troubling about this is that a lot of this money is being spent. We don't know who's spending it. We don't know how much they're spending, and we don't know where they're spending it. It's this dark money that's flowing in, and there's a substantial amount of this $1 million that is in that dark money category where we just have no idea what interests are behind it, and I think that's very troublesome too. And it's going to be a real priority for us to get after that if we do take back the majority. Campaign finance reform is going to be one of our top priorities.
I want to turn just quickly. 2004. The DFL lost the majority. The Republicans picked up 10 out-state votes. So what is your message to those rural voters and those farmers out there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a couple of things. One is, I think if you actually look at compare our records, I think we compare very favorably in terms of making sure we're making priorities of things like broadband investment, making sure that tax relief for farmers is something that we've been pushing for and fighting for, making sure we're investing in things like local government aid, which actually helps small towns keep their fire departments and police departments functioning and get the kind of parks. The real issue here, from my perspective, is that in some cases, too many young people are leaving those areas and they're not going back. And one thing we need to do is make the kind of investments, both in job creation and in housing, and then in the quality of life, to make sure that those are places that people want to continue to live in, and I think they do if we could get the jobs there. So we're very focused on that, and making sure that we kind of adopt policies that aren't kind of one size fit all for the whole state of Minnesota.
Right.
Because things that work in the metro area don't necessarily work in greater Minnesota, and vice versa. And we need to make sure we're always kind of listening to that and paying attention to that. The other thing that we need to do is pass a statewide transportation bill that's comprehensive, because I think that's a huge part of that economic development.
Representative Teason, that's all the time we have today, but I want to thank you so much for coming over.
Well, thank you.
President Obama recently visited the nation of Laos in Southeast Asia, acknowledging the deadly legacy of what has become known as the CIA's secret war. Next, we'll show you how that long-ago conflict connects to Minnesota and to a new memorial at the Capitol. On a sultry June morning in 2016, marking the more than 4 decades that have passed since the first Hmong refugees arrived in the United States, a memorial to commemorate the U.S. and Alliance Special Forces in Laos was installed on the Minnesota State Capitol grounds. The monument depicts the contributions, sacrifices, and experiences of the Hmong, Lao, and American soldiers, as well as the nurses, advisors, and volunteers who served and fought for freedom in Southeast Asia from 1961 to 1975. The memorial itself is a 10-foot tall bronze depiction of a bamboo sprout.
We came up with the concept of using a bamboo sprout to symbolize the vigorous renewal that the Hmong culture has experienced here in Minnesota, because bamboo was a plant that they used to survive on in the jungles when food sources had all disappeared, and it was their shelter and many other functions for them. So it's an important plant to them, and it also has those qualities of being a vigorous resprouter. If somebody hacks it down, it can come back to life. And that's essentially what happened to them in Laos, is they were almost exterminated, or they were being tried to exterminate them. So they have come back strong and vigorous, full of courage, and that's what we wanted to portray.
The inspiration behind the bas-relief depictions on the statue was the story cloths created by the Hmong women in Thai refugee camps. Known for their fine embroidery skills, Hmong women created tapestries portraying events and stories from Hmong history and culture to earn money. Some of these tapestries depict in great detail the refugees' harrowing war experiences.
My first memory in life was the gush wind hitting my face with blowing sand, to my face, and it's not a natural wind, but it's it's a wind that gather all the sand blowing at you, caused by the helicopter or caused by plane taking off from the clandestine airfield of Longchang. Longchang is the name of that airfield, or landing, or when they're taking people back in the body bags, or when they lift off. So that was my first memory of being at the airfield and sandy wind just blowing in my face.
In the early 1960s, fearing the spread of communism, the CIA began a secret war in the officially neutral Kingdom of Laos, recruiting approximately 46,000 Hmong and Lao men and boys who became known as the SGU, or Special Guerrilla Unit, to help fight the North Vietnamese. By the end of the war, as many as 35,000 Hmong soldiers were killed or missing in action, and more than 120,000 displaced Hmong people began to flee. Senator He describes his own family's escape.
It's always that they will greet each other loudly and so happy and cuddle each other, but that time the conversation become whisper. They're all happy, but they're all happy because they're together, but all the conversation are whisper, like that. And I said, that's kind of strange, As a kid, 8 years old, 10 years old, that's kind of strange. Finally, this time, all the adults are whispering to each other. And then I saw my dad handing money to all my relatives. I didn't know what that meant, but meaning that we're not going to see each other. So here, trying to make your way across. My father probably the highest earner, being that he's a military man, so he, divide his money to his relative and trying to make your way across.
The escapes from almost certain genocide from Laos to Thailand were fraught with danger, including the life-threatening crossing of the Mekong River, illustrated in many Hmong story cloths.
So immediately after the war, the communists won, and they were capturing everybody they could, and they would kill men, kill babies, and capture Americans who were still left there also, and take people into these prison of war camps, and they called them re-education centers. And there they would have to grow vegetables to, facilitate the communists. And some of the tortures involved being tied to poles, being buried up to your neck in sand, being carried into these underground pits where there would be bamboo roof over your head, but you'd be in isolation under the ground.
These are just some of the many stories represented on the 16 panels of the memorial. The 4 tiers on the memorial tell a multitude of stories, each from a different point of view.
When I start looking at the bottom, I see the politics, but then as time goes by, I see the disaster and then the sorrow. Then a couple layers up, I see the hope, the prosperity, the welcomeness of Minnesotan. And I do get a little giggling, it's a little humorous as I go up, as they put a few character, quirky looking Minnesotan with thick coat, and some with mitten, and some with Lutheran pastor look, welcoming, the Hmong as they land at the Minneapolis International Airport. So, and then there's even a snowman next to a church, and that's, that is kind of truly how, it's a small picture, and we can't stereotype that is Minnesota, but in itself, it does show Minnesota. It shows kind of some way the land of the Green Giant, or the Pillsbury Doughboy, or the Ham Spear. When I see the snowman next to the church, so I get that, humorous perspective from that, just that small image, yeah.
The images are powerful and transcend language barriers. For those whose lives were lost and those whose lives were affected by the United States' secret war in Laos, their children, their grandchildren, and all of us have a special place on the St. Paul Capitol grounds in which to learn, reflect, and remember. A bill is a formal document produced for the legislative process, intended to meet constitutional and legislative requirements. It is a proposal to make new law or change existing law, and can be considered a working document, subject to change at almost any point during the process. Producer Jon Brune explains some ways to better understand what to look for and how to follow along.
The first way to read a bill would be to look at the title. There's going to be generally what the bill is relating to. The first line is always a bill for an act. So it is a bill proposing to change some type of legislation. The next thing that you'll see is what the bill is relating to. So that'll be a very general topic, and under the Constitution, a bill can only relate to one subject. After that general subject will be particular subtopics about what the bill proposes to do. Then further down in the title of the bill are the sections of law that the bill proposes to amend. Following the title, if the bill is long or complex, the bill could be broken up into articles. And articles are very general signposts kind of that break the bill up into discrete subtopics. So, for example, in an omnibus tax bill, an article would be Article 1, income tax, Article 2, sales and use tax. Within articles, there are sections. A section of a bill is where a statute or law is proposed to be amended, whether it be adding to or deleting language from existing law, or adding entirely new language, a new section of law, or repealing language. If it's a shorter bill or deals with just a couple of issues, the bill wouldn't be broken up into articles. However, a bill always has section numbers. So even if it is just one section of law, a couple lines of changed language, there's always going to be a section 1. The numbers going down the left margin of the page, those will indicate the page number and a line number. The number to the left of the period is always the page number, and the number to the right of the period is the line number. So for example, if someone had a question about page 1, line 12, that would be easy to locate in the bill. This is a way for senators and staff and those following along with the bill to easily refer to a specific place in a bill that might be being discussed. Another way to easily locate information in a bill, especially in a longer or complex bill, would be at the very bottom of the page. And that will always list the article number and the section number that appears on that page, as well as the page number. Within a bill, language can be crossed out and underlined. Language that is crossed out is called stricken language. That is language that is proposed to be removed from existing law. Language that is underlined is proposed to be new language added to the law. So a lot of times you'll see language stricken, and then right after it you'll see language that is underlined. So one way to interpret that is that the old language, the stricken language, would be replaced by the proposed new language. One section of a bill that is important to note is a definition section. Sometimes in a bill, entirely new terms are used, or terms are used that appear elsewhere in law but that are specific to what this section of law or what this bill would apply to. So it's always important to read the definitions in a bill to see how those terms are going to be applied in that particular piece of legislation. At the very end of the bill, especially in a long bill, there will be an appendix, and that'll be an indication of the article numbers and titles and the pages on which the articles first appear. And that's an easy way in a particularly long bill to flip quickly to a particular article.
For more information on bills at the state legislature, follow the link below.
Join us again next week as we continue to talk about the upcoming election. I'm Shannon Loehrke, and on behalf of all of us at Senate Media Services, thanks for watching.